For most of the last century, one specific question refused to settle down. When did the first humans reach North America? Textbooks once gave a very clean and simple answer. Around 13,000 years ago, a group called the Clovis people crossed an ice-free corridor. They spread fast across the continent. It was a neat story that felt finished, but cracks kept showing in this narrative as years passed. Sites appeared that looked much older than they should be. The dates simply did not line up with the established timeline. The ice-free corridor itself appeared to have opened too late for the migration. Still, nothing fully closed the case because every new claim met heavy doubt. Layers of earth could be mixed by animals or water. Carbon dates could be wrong due to contamination. Tools could actually be natural stones shaped by river currents. The mystery stayed open, and that mattered deeply to our understanding of history. If humans were here earlier, it meant they survived harsher conditions and adapted faster. For decades, no single site could force the issue or provide a final answer. Then evidence surfaced in a place no one expected to settle the debate. It was not a dry cave or a windswept plain. It was a flooded sinkhole in Florida, buried under meters of dark mud. This place is called Page-Ladson, and what it preserved finally answered the question for good. Now, new evidence has settled this mystery, and we finally have the complete picture. The story of how we found the truth begins in the Osceola River. This is a quiet waterway in northern Florida, lined with cypress trees and marsh. 14,500 years ago, this spot looked very different. During the last ice age, sea levels were 400 feet lower than today. This happened because so much water was locked in massive glaciers. Florida was twice as wide as it is now. The Osceola River was not a flowing stream, but a series of deep sinkholes. These were the only reliable sources of fresh water in a dry landscape. Mastodons, which were ancient relatives of elephants, drank at these watering holes. Ancient camels and bison moved through the open grasslands. Small groups of humans camped nearby to hunt and gather. When sea levels eventually rose, these sinkholes flooded and filled with sediment. This mud created a perfect seal that blocked out oxygen. Without oxygen, the bacteria that cause rot cannot survive. This lack of decay preserved organic materials that usually vanish in a few years. It created a reference lab for what early sites look like when decay is paused. Archaeologists first started exploring the sinkhole in the 1980s. Jim Dunbar and David Webb led the early dives into the dark water. They used scuba gear to reach the bottom of the sinkhole, 30 feet down. They found stone tools and mastodon bones almost immediately. One specific finding caught their eye, a mastodon tusk with deep grooves. The researchers suspected these were butcher marks made by human stone tools. They used radiocarbon dating to find the age of the bones. Radiocarbon dating is a method that measures the decay of carbon-14 isotopes. This acts like a chemical clock to tell us when an organism died. The initial results came back at 14,500 years old. This was 1,500 years older than the Clovis people were supposed to be. However, the scientific community was not ready to accept the result yet. Skeptics argued that the river current might have moved the bones. They suggested that older bones could have washed into younger layers of silt. This is why stratigraphy is so important in archaeology. Stratigraphy is the study of soil layers, where older material is at the bottom. To prove humans were there, they needed to show the layers were undisturbed. The case remained in limbo for years until a new team arrived in 2012. Jesse Halligan and Michael Waters brought modern technology to the site. They wanted to build an evidence hierarchy that no one could ignore. They spent 3 seasons diving into the tannic, tea-colored water of the Osceola. They worked in near-total darkness, using powerful lights and suction hoses. They excavated the site with the same precision used on dry land. They carefully mapped every bone and tool in 3-dimensional space. This allowed them to prove the artifacts had not moved for thousands of years. They found a stone knife, known as a biface, in a layer of peat. Peat is a dense mass of partially decayed vegetable matter. This peat layer was completely intact and had never been shifted by water. This was a critical piece of the puzzle because it showed human tools were sealed in place. This discovery connects separate findings from across the continent into one coherent timeline. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together. Methodology transparency is what makes this discovery so powerful. The team did not just rely on one test or one sample. They took 71 new radiocarbon samples from the site to be certain. They used a specific type called accelerated mass spectrometry, or AMS dating. This technique is more precise than older methods because it counts individual carbon atoms. They dated the peat, the woody roots, and even animal remains. All the dates clustered around 14,150 years ago. This consistency proved that the age was not a mistake or an outlier. They also examined the mastodon tusk again with high-resolution imaging. They compared the grooves on the tusk to marks made by modern stone tools. The analysis showed that the marks were definitely made by humans. The marks were located exactly where a hunter would cut to remove the tusk from the skull. This was intentional butchery, not natural wear from the river. We now know that these humans were skilled hunters of megafauna. Megafauna refers to the large animals like mastodons and giant ground sloths that lived back then. But the most incredible evidence was something much smaller and more delicate. They found straw mats made of chopped up plant material. When they analyzed these mats under a microscope, they found something shocking. The material was actually mastodon digesta, which is a polite term for mastodon dung. Because the sinkhole had no oxygen, the digestive contents of the animals were preserved. They could see exactly what the mastodons had eaten for their last meal. They found bits of cypress twigs and bark that had been chewed and swallowed. This material was also dated to 14,550 years ago. This provides a smoking gun moment for the presence of humans. The stone tools were found directly inside and under these layers of mastodon waste. There is no way for a stone tool to move into the middle of a solid mass of dung. This means the humans were standing right there at the pond edge with the animals. They were butchering the mastodons in the mud 14,500 years ago. This evidence proves definitively that humans arrived thousands of years before the Clovis culture. This discovery was published in the journal Science Advances in 2016. It was a major moment for authority validation in the field of archaeology. The study was led by experts from Texas A&M University and Florida State University. 6 independent peer reviewers checked the data before it was released. 3 separate laboratories verified the radiocarbon dates to ensure accuracy. This is how we build trust through a rigorous scientific process. Most people still think the Clovis people were the first Americans. You now know the real story before it reaches the most common textbooks. This is cutting-edge knowledge that has changed the way we view our origins. The debate that puzzled scientists for 50 years is now effectively over. Humans did not wait for an ice-free corridor to open in the north. They were already living in Florida while the giant ice sheets still covered Canada. To understand the scale of this, we must look at the systematic timeline. 23,000 years ago, humans were living in Siberia and parts of Asia. 15,500 years ago, we see evidence of people at the Buttermilk Creek site in Texas. 14,550 years ago, we have the confirmed presence at Page-Ladson in Florida. 13,000 years ago, the Clovis culture becomes widespread across North America. The timeline is now mapped out with clear and certain dates. This tells us that the first Americans likely traveled along the coast. They used boats to move south while the interior of the continent was still frozen. This is known as the coastal migration theory. It explains how people could reach Florida and even South America so early. Your ancestors were among the small groups who made this incredible journey. This is your origin story as a resident of this continent. It is a story of extreme survival and successful adaptation to a changing world. The preservation at Page-Ladson is a rare gift from the earth. Most archaeological sites only leave behind stone and bone. Acidic soil usually eats away at wood, plants, and DNA over time. But the Osceola River sinkholes turned into a kind of reference lab. They show us what we are usually missing from the historical record. When decay is paused, the everyday world of the past reappears. We get to see the plants they used and the gut contents of the animals they hunted. This takes the story out of the realm of maybe and puts it into a chain of cause and effect. If the water chemistry had been slightly different, the evidence would have dissolved. Only the low oxygen environment let these samples survive for 14,000 years. Without that specific chemistry, we would still be guessing about the dates. We would still be arguing about whether those marks on the tusk were real. The fact that this material survived is a near miss for science. It is the difference between knowing the truth and having an eternal mystery. We can now look at the environment these people faced with great detail. 14,500 years ago, the world was in the middle of a massive climate shift. The Ice Age was ending, but the weather was still cold and unpredictable. The people at Page-Ladson were living in a landscape of transition. They saw the giant mastodons begin to disappear as the climate warmed. They had to be extremely flexible in what they ate and how they moved. They used local stone like chert to make their tools. Chert is a hard, glass-like rock that breaks with sharp edges. They traveled long distances to find high-quality stone for their knives. This shows they had a deep knowledge of the geography and resources of Florida. They were not just wandering lost in a new world, they were masters of their environment who understood the seasonal patterns of the sinkholes. This pattern of behavior is seen at other early sites as well. It connects the people in Florida to the people in Texas and Oregon. The existence of these people also changes what we know about human populations. Genetic analysis of modern Native American DNA shows a specific pattern. It proves that all indigenous people in the Americas come from a single founding group. This group spent time isolated in a region called Beringia between Asia and Alaska. They likely stayed there for thousands of years during the coldest part of the Ice Age. This created a genetic bottleneck where the population was small and distinct. Then, as the ice began to melt, they moved south very quickly. DNA evidence confirms that this migration happened in several waves. The people at Page-Ladson represent one of the very first waves of this movement. You carry the legacy of these early migrations in the human genome today. Roughly 1 to 4% of some modern DNA can be traced back to early mixing events. This is not just abstract history, it is a physical part of who we are. The Clovis first theory was not just a scientific idea, it was a wall that prevented us from seeing the truth for a long time. It was a popular misconception that stayed in place because the evidence for anything else was so hard to find. We now know that the first Americans were here much longer than we thought. They were here during the time of the great mammoths and the giant ground sloths. They lived through the extinction of these animals and the rise of the modern forest. This provides a sense of closure to a debate that lasted for generations. We no longer have to wonder if the early dates are real. The evidence from Page-Ladson, verified by dozens of tests, has closed the case. The mystery of the first Americans is now a solved problem in history. The definitive proof came from the combination of three things. First, the stone tool was found in a sealed layer of mastodon dung. Second, the tusk showed undeniable human butcher marks. Third, 71 separate radiocarbon tests, all pointed to the same date. This is the evidence hierarchy in action, moving from suggestion to absolute proof. 3 separate labs confirmed the results independently. This level of verification is the gold standard of modern science. It removes any room for doubt or academic hedging. We now have the complete picture of when and how this continent was settled. The question that refused to settle down for a century has finally been answered. The pieces finally fit together into a coherent story of human triumph. Page-Ladson shows us that the record of the past is not inherently thin. It is often just chemically erased by time and weather. When we find a place where the chemistry is controlled, the truth comes out. The Osceola River sinkholes preserved a world that was supposed to be lost. They gave us the chopped plant straw, the cypress peat, and the mastodon digesta. These perishables reveal a richer behavioral record than stone tools ever could. They prove that real ecosystems and real behaviors were present 14,550 years ago. This discovery has fulfilled the need for completed knowledge about our origins. We are no longer guessing in the dark about the first Americans. The decades-long mystery is now solved and the debate is over. We can now move forward with a firm understanding of our history. The evidence is airtight and the conclusion is clear. Humans have been part of the American landscape for over 14,000 years. We have the proof, we have the dates, and now we have the truth. This is a closed chain of cause and effect that provides the closure we sought. The case is closed. Now we know.